What's up, guys? Today we're going to be talking about authorization, security, and roles. Um, so, first things first, going to launch up the client to talk about the life cycle of how authorization works. So, when a new user comes into your site, they're not logged in. That means they're not authorized. Being authorized just means you're logged in. And then there are roles like admin, user, worker, which can change what you have access to. So just gonna wait for this to pop up. I'm gonna start up the server as well. I'm gonna run the server dev. It's coming on. All right, so we have our site here, and I have just opened this site, and it's been a little while, so maybe the refresh token will kick me out. Nope, still good. But that is something we will talk about later. Um, so I am currently logged in. I'm going to log out. So this is what a user sees when they first enter your site, right? They're unauthorized. And an example of how a server would block someone that's not authorized is within the API examples. So unprotected numbers, that means that numbers, there's no there's no middleware in the server. There's no authentication middleware in the server that blocks the uh, user from getting access to the endpoint. So if we look into the server here, we can see inside of our roots, inside of our data roots, we see no auth numbers. There is no middleware, there's no function is authenticated that is before the endpoint that checks to see if the user is authenticated. Um, so there's nothing there, and that blocks them from getting access. So how how do you even get authenticated? How does that process even work? Um, well, first the user has to log in with their information, right? That goes to a login function, and that gives the user a uh, it gives the user a refresh token, and the refresh token gets stored with the user's object in MongoDB, and it also generates an access token that gives back to the client. So as you see here, look into the service, you can see that first it checks to see if the password is good with the email. And then you see we generate a access token that expires based off the time you give it in the end variable, and obviously has a secret which is stored inside the end variables. Um, and then it also generates a refresh token, and that refresh token expires a lot longer than the um, than the access token, and that's because the access token constantly gets refreshed um, to just ensure that the user constantly has to check if they have access. Um, and you could change the refresh token in the backend to something random, and when the access token attempts to get refreshed, the the user will be logged out because the refresh token doesn't is not paired with the access token at all. Uh, so that's how that process works. And um, there's something called middleware, which is that function that we showed you in the roots here. Uh, in the roots, this function comes from a middleware class, which basically checks to see if the access token is still good right here. If it's bad, it will say that it is bad, and it will tell the client it has to refresh it, and that's where it sends a um, sends a request to refresh it inside of here, which doesn't have authentication middleware because you should be able to refresh any token. Um, and it just sees if it can refresh it. So that's how the authentication works in the back end. In the front end, you will see inside of the boot Axios, you will see a API interceptor. So basically, every single request and response goes through these interceptors, and the requests, you always have to make sure that you have the token with the requests. So instead of putting it in every single um, function, you just have an interceptor that just does it once for you always and gets the token from the local settings. Um, so this is the interceptor, and this is just some stuff I have to try to get the user back to where they were looking if they are re like forcibly refreshed. Um, so as you see here, if there is an issue and it's a 401 issue, which is what the middleware gives in the back end, you see res.status 401 on line 35. The the interceptor will try to attempt the refresh as long as it wasn't coming from the request itself. So if it comes from the refresh request itself and it failed, that means it obviously tried to refresh and it shouldn't, so I'm gonna log you out. And if it's not, then attempt to refresh the session. The false here is just if the there should be a shown error. So obviously, whenever I get a issue, um, whenever I'm refreshing, sometimes you might want to show that you had to refresh, sometimes you don't. I don't want to do this for every single request that might need to be refreshed, so I have it set to false. Um, and yeah, that's where this happens. So that's the authentication aspect of things. Um, Next, we're going to talk about roles. So obviously, if you look into the database, you can just look at this DB user JSON. So this is where we use this with npm database seeder, um, and we like we see that there's an admin and a user, and the roles have admin, user, admin, user. So inside the backend, there you can actually make a request that only has admin, and that's using the has role function that I created. So if the user is, so this is the backend, you're trying to get all your users. You obviously don't want that to be accessible by any user. So first you have to make sure the user is authenticated, and then you have to make sure the user has a role of admin. Why do you have to do authenticated before admin? This function, because this authenticated function actually sets up the user here, so we have access to it inside of here when we want to attempt to see if the user has roles. And then you can get the page data. And that's the roles aspect. So that's like basic security within a server. It's just authentication. You can even add a email verification function if you want. Like you can have a middleware that is ensures that the email is confirmed. You can have one for MFA, multi-factor authentication. You can kind of go wild with this. The other thing I want to talk about is the security service. So security service inside of here, basically, You can block IPs based off country, or you can block IPs based off um, just uh, too many invalid or suspicious attempts to your protected routes. Like, for instance, when a normal user attempts to go into the admin route multiple times, I have a function that checks and blocks the IP if the user is not the role or not the user that's supposed or it doesn't have the user. So like this like hacker is trying to get into my stuff and he keeps trying and like I can just let him keep trying and keep blocking him every single time, but that might add stress to my server, my API. So what I do is I check to see like, hey, this person has attempted this once, attempted this twice, attempted this 5 times. I'm gonna see if his IP is not blocked. If it's not blocked, then block him because that's not okay, and it shouldn't be that way. And I just get an alert email if they are blocked, um, which you will too. Uh, but to be honest, you can turn this off if you want because it might get annoying. Because there are bots out there that do this continuously and it will ring up your email service. So maybe I'll turn this off for now. So once an IP gets blocked, it won't be able to access your code uh, or your routes because we have set up inside of the server process, which actually creates the server, the API. Um, we have added a middleware to use always. That's why you put it inside a server, and it is the IP filter middleware where basically it just checks to see if the IP is blocked, and if the IP is blocked, then um, don't allow them to come in. Yeah, that's about it.